And the key behind all of this and sort of getting the political momentum for the cap and trade system was really the revenue that was available when you're talking about a cap and invest. So with the carbon levy, that was actually generating $200 million a year in revenue that was reinvested entirely in the fight against climate change. And that was between 2006 and 2012. But since the carbon market has come into effect, we've already invested $2 billion in fighting climate change and mitigation, and transport, electrification, energy efficiency. And what we anticipate is that by 2020, we'll have $3.3 billion invested through the same system. And that revenue was the key. And I think if there's anything to sort of take away from my presentation today, and this is an important lesson for Vermont as well, is that when we were designing this policy, it had to work for all communities across the province. It couldn't just work for the city of Montreal. You know, that was one of the goals at the time, was to generate revenue and fix the metro. But there's some people in Quebec, it's enormous, I have a map a little bit later, that are never gonna see the metro in their entire life. So how do you convince them that they should raise their prices if they only have an option to drive? And the way that we did that is by this revenue, which really offers something for everybody. So even if the emissions reduction, you know, of a project in a small town might be relatively small, you're funding a regional bus route or a pedestrian overpass, that's not gonna bring you to your 2020 goal necessarily, but you're getting political buy-in from those communities, and they're supporting the policy that will allow you to reduce emissions province-wide or statewide. So, to take a look at some of the examples, so this $3.3 billion is great in the abstract. How do we actually spend it? A lot of it goes towards transportation. So this green fund is fully protected, which is important. I know that some states have rated their funds. The green fund cannot be spent on anything but reducing GHG emissions. There's no option to spend it on anything else. So if you have a project and you're a municipality and you have a project and you say this is going to get people out of their cars, you can apply for green fund money. You have to prove that, but you're able to get funding. And 2/3, because we're in a situation much like Vermont, 40% of Quebec's emissions are coming from transportation. So we have to tackle this if we're going to reduce our emissions and meet our goals. So 2/3 of green fund money is going towards transportation. Thinking about where it's actually going, one of the things that we've benefited from in these rural regions especially is the rural bus routes that I mentioned. So this is a great example. It was actually cited by the OECD as one of the best policies associated with the Green Fund. But what we're able to do in some of our aging communities, Vermont is aging, or Quebec is aging at a similar rate to Vermont, and it's disproportionately affecting our small towns. So the Green Fund is able to supply investments and pilot project money for maintaining rural bus routes that are bringing people into cities for their medical care, but allowing them to stay in their communities and keep those communities alive if they can no longer drive. You're reducing GHG emissions. Again, maybe it's a little small, but you're getting support from those places because they're seeing the benefit of this investment. Another area that's benefiting province-wide is EV infrastructure. Long before it's profitable, the government is able to invest and build out EV infrastructure in some of the smallest regions, smallest towns of Quebec. And today we have about 2,300 EV charging stations across the province. And that's leading to people adopting this at a faster clip. So 50% of Canada's EVs are actually in Quebec. We don't even have a quarter of the population. So you can see the correlation. When the infrastructure is available, people are willing to make a change and adjust, and that includes outside of urban areas. So I've been telling a great story, at least I hope you think it's good, about how we've been spending our money, but is any of it actually working? And so far, so good. I think, like I said at the beginning, there's still a lot more that could be done. There's still a lot more progress to be made. But since from 1990 to 2015, which is the period that this graph looks at, we've seen a significant reduction. So there's been a nearly 9% reduction in GHG emissions. But what's important is that at the same time, I'll try to use this, the economy has been growing. That's the yellow line here. The population has been growing. And emissions reductions per capita have been going down, as well as the carbon intensity of the economy. So that's about a 43% reduction in the carbon intensity of Quebec's economy, which means that moving forward, these emissions reductions overall in the economy will be even more impactful. And something that I think shows a good example of that Quebec, is not special, is that when we were instituting this, when we were first looking at a carbon tax and then later at a carbon market, we had the exact same outcries from all sectors of the economy that said, this is going to cripple the economy. We're going to have no economic growth. You're going to stop jobs. And John has already talked to this a little bit about how that's not true, and it hasn't been true in Quebec. And we can't obviously point just to the carbon market as the only reason why the economy has been growing. But what we can say very clearly is that our ambitious climate policies have not been an impediment to the economy. In fact, our economy has been doing better today than it ever has been. We have the lowest unemployment rate since 1976. We've had the most full-time jobs, or private sector jobs generated than the rest of Canada combined. And when you consider the size of Quebec's public sector, which includes me, that's a pretty impressive number. We're not usually known for our private sector jobs, but the government is creating a lot of jobs a lot of the time. And the key of the investment piece that I've been talking about is that when you are investing and you have this amount of money to invest thanks to the Green Fund, you're also mitigating any of the potential economic impact or the negative economic impact that could come from raising prices. And what we've estimated is that the $2 billion that I talked about from the Green Fund has generated 43,000 jobs in Quebec. But what's important to know, and really important takeaway from this, is that those jobs aren't just in Montreal. So like I said before, Quebec is an enormous province. Most of you have been to Montreal, I'm sure, Quebec City. Only half of our population of 8 million lives in those two cities, which means that the rest of them are spread out around here. The black is no one, so don't get lost. Or next to no one. We like to remind our French friends that Quebec is 3 times the size of France. They don't like that very much, but they do then remind us that almost all of the population has to live close to the United States. That's their constant refrain. But sometimes better neighbors than others. But these jobs have been created outside of the metropolitan regions, and that includes in the Gaspé Peninsula. Has anybody actually been there to the Gaspé region? So that's out here, for those of you who aren't familiar. It's about 6 hours east of Quebec City if you're driving. I'm considering going on a trip there with my boyfriend next year. We're worried about the mileage we're going to put on the trip. But if you go around the Gaspé Peninsula here, that's become the center of Quebec's wind energy industry. Now, it doesn't actually make sense to develop a wind energy industry in Quebec. We already have hydropower unless you have funding, which is generated by the carbon market, to do it and to sell some of that electricity to New Brunswick, to the maritime provinces, Nova Scotia and PEI. And that wind industry has generated 5,000 jobs in the Gaspé Peninsula. That's huge for a region like that. There's some of the black section there. There's not a lot of people living there. 5,000 is huge. Also in the north of Montreal, so outside of the metropolitan area, sort of there, 2 great stories that come out of that region. In Joliette, which is a small town about an hour and a half north of Montreal, Lion Electric School Buses has built their factory. Some of those school buses are on the roads here in Vermont. They've generated hundreds of jobs in that region of Quebec, which is a former manufacturing center, not innovative manufacturing, not clean tech manufacturing. And in that same region, which you really wouldn't expect, in the town of Rawdon, is Canada's largest EV sales car dealership. It's not in downtown Montreal, it's not in downtown Toronto, it's in Rawdon, Quebec, which is an hour and a half from Montreal. And so those folks are benefiting from this, and they're driving EVs on top of it. So just to wrap up, and I'll leave this up because I think it says a lot about us, but just to wrap up, and we can talk about this more in the question and answer period, is the question that we get when we come back from Vermont is, could Vermont join the Western Climate Initiative? It has been working pretty well. Like I said, there's still a lot more to be done. The carbon price there's a big gap between RGGI, which I'm not sure what the latest price is, but there is a big gap there. But could Vermont, if it wanted to, cover transportation emissions with the Western Climate Initiative, or transportation and building and thermal energy with the Western Climate Initiative? And the answer is absolutely yes. And you can keep RGGI untouched while covering new sectors of the economy with a system that's already in place. And the beauty of it is that we've already done a lot of the legwork, but even more so California has done a lot of the legwork to get this system up and running. It's a policy that works well there, and they've adapted it for a US framework. And so now the system is plug and play in a sense. If you're tracking your emissions well, you're able to join. WCI offers tons of resources as a nonprofit board funded currently by Quebec and California and by small fees on those emissions auctions allowances that could get Vermont to institute this system and provide some of that administrative legwork that needs to be done. And there are other states that are looking at this. Oregon is looking at it very seriously. There's elements in Washington state that were not part of the carbon tax discussion, but looking at this possibility for WCI. And in Nova Scotia as well is probably the furthest along right now as being a new member to join WCI. So the answer is yes, we could work together. We're hoping to do that. We're hoping to continue working together, whether it's with WCI or with the carbon price in a different form. But this region is truly a leader in climate change, and I think what we've proven in Quebec, and I think is true in Vermont as well, is that climate policy doesn't have to confront economic policy. You can combine the two and you can do well and you can grow well. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
This is a pretty slide.
This is
So my name's Ben Andrew Lee Walsh. As Joey mentioned, I'm the Climate and Energy Program Director with the Vermont Public Interest Research Group. I don't have a PowerPoint. I'm going to speak have somewhat briefer comments than my colleagues, and then as they've alluded to, we're looking for lots of time for Q&A. So I wanted to give just a brief sort of background on how VPIRG and many of the other environmental organizations, including the NRC, who we work very closely with on this and many other things, came to work so much on carbon pricing, how we came to the conclusion that it is an essential policy for Vermont, and then talk about sort of how we see it fitting into the broader picture of energy policies, because it isn't the only thing we need to do by any stretch. And then close just talking a little bit about the Decarbonisation Study that was authorized, that you may have heard about a little bit if you were in the legislative panel this morning, that Joey mentioned and John mentioned briefly, and some things that you can do if you'd like to take action and make all of this a little bit more likely. So when in 2013, early 2014, a number of us who've been working on energy policy in Vermont, climate policy, for years, it became pretty apparent that we weren't actually getting where we needed to go. That we made a lot of progress, that there was good things happening in solar, and for a little while there, wind, but that ultimately we weren't going to be seeing the kind of emissions reductions numbers that we needed to actually do our part to reduce to ultimately solve the climate crisis. And so we started, having some meetings and looking at all of the potential, big ideas that we could take on as a state. And carbon pricing obviously sort of rose to the top very quickly as something that all around the world, in all parts of the political spectrum, became really obviously one of the, if not the, most essential policies that we could pursue. And so then, for us, it was really a question of, okay, so that's a good policy. Would it be a good policy for Vermont? Would it be a good idea for Vermont to do this, for Vermonters, for Vermont's economy, et cetera? Not just something that would be good for climate, but bad for our state. We weren't interested in pursuing something like that, as much, despite what you might hear from some opponents of the policy. So we did the research. John mentioned we commissioned the REMI analysis, economic modeling on this, that looked at what the potential impacts on Vermont's economy would be, and it found that broadly speaking, it would be good for the economy. You'd see modest declines in unemployment, increases in GDP, and you'd see carbon pollution go down quite substantially. One thing it also showed was it wasn't a silver bullet. And to quote Bill McKibben briefly, we're not looking for a silver bullet on climate. There is no silver bullet on climate. We're looking for silver buckshot, and frankly, quite a lot of it. We're not going to get this done without policy. You hear that kind of rhetoric a little bit, from some of the folks nationally on the right side of the political spectrum working on carbon pricing, like we just need to do this one thing, and in exchange for doing this, take everything else off the table, and then we'll be fine on climate. And the reality of the research and all the evidence is that's not the case. But it is really a key policy nonetheless. So it became, in 2014, really our top priority as an organization. That's true for many of the other organizations working on it as well. But it wasn't the only thing we were working on. We launched we collectively launched the Energy Independent Vermont Coalition, I hope have heard of, in late 2014. And then in 2015, we went into the legislature and said, you need to do this, and we're also proud to support a renewable energy standard. Now, I'll get to this in a moment. We think that renewable energy standard that passed did some good things, but also needs some real improvement. But since then, we've supported increases in appliance efficiency standards. We've gone to bat to keep the Scott administration from stopping rating energy efficiency Vermont's budget. We've gone to regulators and, unfortunately, not with as much success as we'd like, tried to keep the net metering program strong, and on and on and on. And so going forward, we really see carbon pricing as one of what I would describe as one of the legs of a three-legged stool. Like the three most essential policies that we need to implement in the next 1, 2, 3 years in Vermont: carbon pricing, 100% renewable energy standard, a requirement to get all of our electricity from renewable energy in the not too distant future, and a lot more of that energy from renewables right here in Vermont, not just relying on out-of-state hydro. And then 3, a ban on new significant fossil fuel infrastructure, in particular pipelines, because it's absolutely insane to be investing tens of millions of dollars of ratepayer money right now on new infrastructure that, if you look at the science, needs to be retired the same day that it's put into operation. So if you look at those as sort of the 3 legs of a climate policy stool, there are also a lot of other little things. I mean, a stool isn't just 3 legs. It's, there are screws that are holding it together, there are pegs that are, making sure that it doesn't fall apart, and there are a lot of other little policies that we need to pursue in order to make that whole work. Like doubling low-income weatherization funding, like getting electric vehicle incentives for lower and moderate income Vermonters, so that this whole transition can be done in a way that, as you heard from Mayor Weinberger this morning, is equitable, as well as solving our climate crisis just from a strict amount of CO2 we're emitting standpoint. So I want to say just one last thing on carbon pricing, and then shift to the Decarbonisation Study and then some action that you can take, and then we can do lots of Q&A. So you heard about 2 different types of carbon pricing this morning, or this afternoon. You heard about what I would consider direct carbon pricing, or carbon pricing through the tax system, and then you heard about emission trading scheme or cap and trade. There's a bunch of names for both of these. I would just throw out for you that while it's not quite tomato, it's not as different as many people have made it out to be. There have been long, drawn-out debates in academic circles and in policy circles about, no, this one's better, no, that one's better. We should argue with each other instead of arguing people who don't actually think we should be doing anything like that. And that's really frustrating to see as someone who wants some action rather than no action. And the reality is, when you're actually implementing these, at the end of the day, you're putting a price on carbon pollution. And if you're doing it well, if you're doing it carefully, there are design mechanisms in both systems that I'm not going to get into the weeds on, but they make them look more like the other one. Things that, essentially make sure that we're meeting those goals of economic justice, equity, economic development, and actually getting the job done from a climate standpoint. So we are interested in seeing carbon pricing in Vermont. We think that Vermont shouldn't wait, just like you heard from Mayor Weinberger this morning. It's important to get other states in the region to do this as well, but the fact that they are not moving does not mean that we should not. And that's what the economic evidence suggests as well. So we're open to direct carbon pricing in Vermont through the tax system. We're open to a cap and trade program if it looks like there's momentum there. But either way, we need to put a price on carbon pollution, and we need to do it in the near term. So the last thing I'll say is in January 15th, there's going to be this study coming out, the Decarbonisation Study. It was funded by the legislature this last legislative session, and it came originally from the Governor's Climate Action Commission. And that's going to take a really hard look from an economic standpoint, from a climate standpoint, and to some degree from an equity standpoint at both direct carbon pricing in Vermont, cap and trade, and then what implementing those either at the state level or regionally would do. It's not going to look at everything in the kitchen sink like the other policies I listed, but a bunch of different versions of pricing the pollution that's causing this problem in the first place. So as far as action, number one, we need to let legislative leadership know this has to be a priority. I'll jot it down up here when I'm done talking so as not to take away from the Q&A, but if you go to vperg.org/call-on-leaders, you'll be taken to a page that's got a web form that doesn't have anything in it. You have to write your comment. But we're asking people to ask Mitzi Johnson in the House and Tim Ash in the Senate, what's your plan on climate? This is important. What are you planning on doing on it? And then once you take that, you'll get a follow-up email that has some more information on how you can actually call their office, because those kind of personal calls are going to be even more impactful. Number two, talk to your own elected official. Most people in Vermont have multiple reps and multiple senators. Talk to all of them. Make sure they know that it needs to be a priority. And then number three, help us spread the word. Write letters to the editor of your local paper. Follow these organizations on social media and share the occasional post that really sort of spurs some passion in you with your friends and with your family. Talk about this, over the holidays with your family. Mark McDonald and Lauren Hero from BCV this morning were talking about how this needs to be more of a kitchen table issue, and I think we all have some responsibility to take that action. So I'll leave you with do all of that over the next month and a half, and then stay tuned for the Decarbonization Study on January 15th. All of us are going to be helping spread the word about the news that it's sharing and calling on legislators across the political spectrum to follow through and actually heed the recommendations of that, because we know that we have to before it's too late.
You want to all come up here? And before, just put a finer point on what Ben was saying, on what you can do, I just want to, in terms of staying engaged in this conversation, I want to reiterate this sort of following this weekly climate dispatch that we do from the State House. We spend a lot of time in the legislature. Our goal is every Friday to give you a quick little snapshot via Facebook Live of what's happening or not. And then also importantly, to give you a sense of what you can do that week. And then, we have a hashtag here so that ultimately organizations will share it, so that we all build our collective awareness of what's happening, our collective impacts, and our ability to help, new elected officials like our own senator, my own new senator, Andrew Kirchlick from Washington County, move really bold, important public policy. So just finer point on that as a communications and coordination tool. So questions? Okay, let's go back. I'll start with Gary and then we'll go back.
I have a friend in my town who runs a business with 10 large trucks, 6 months out of the year. He's a good friend. He does a lot of good things for the community. He knows I'm an environmentalist. And when the Essex plan came out, I knew I didn't want to talk to my friend about this, because he doesn't want anything that's going to reduce his revenue for his business. And then I listened to John this morning, and I listened to Michael now. And this is probably overly simplistic, but I like the carbon tax approach better than the Essex plan, because it seems more directly rewarding to people like my friend. Do I understand this correctly or not?
I'm not quite sure I understand the
Well,
question.
you're saying you like the Western climate, the
Here's
cabinet invest.
the reason why,
approach.
and I may indicate that I don't understand the Essex plan. my understanding is you tax at the pump, right? And then the revenue comes to lowering everybody's electric bill, not just the big polluters.
Yep.
And the carbon tax, the cap and trade
Yeah.
system allows my friend to buy into this and then get the in return. So my conclusion is he would be happy with a cap and trade system.
Yeah, I mean, just quickly, I mean, I can't speak specifically to how a small trucker in Quebec would see this system, but one of the benefits of the cap and trade system is that it's actually mostly charged at the distribution level. It's only large emitters that actually have to deal with this. It's not small companies that have to sign up and say, okay, our costs are going to increase by this much, and we're going to have to figure out this tax. So he won't have to himself calculate, you know, how much am I emitting every year. That will happen at the distribution level, and his prices may still go up. So the end result may be the same, but it's really just it's kind of a philosophical question. Does he feel better if he's getting a small increase, you know, at the pump, and then other emitters are also being charged a lot? Or does he feel better, I guess, with a more direct tax? I don't know how that, you know, that just depends.
Either way, the charge gets passed down.
Right.
In a chain. The big difference here is that the money goes into a fund that then communities can apply to. So there's no direct benefit, it's only indirect through the
Right.
community that you happen to live in. The idea of the Essex plan is to do a tax shift or a targeted rebate to the electric bill. That infrastructure is already in place. Put on an electric bill, you can target low-income households for extra help. You can target rural households for extra help. But everyone who's paying the price at the pump, as you've phrased it, gets it back in one way or another. And
But
if you
not
get,
one for one.
it all depends on what actions you take as an individual, right? If you decide to put an electric heat pump, if you decide to reduce, to go to a higher efficiency vehicle, you're getting more, that's the whole idea, right? You're being incentivized to save money here, and then you're getting it back over here.
I want to just say one thing briefly on this, because I think it speaks to a little bit like one of the big questions between revenue neutral, which is what Essex is, the Essex plan. Essex plan, you're absolutely right. For folks who haven't just heard it, Gary described it quite well. Fossil fuel prices go up, electric prices go down. Like, that's the simplest version of it. But then the biggest difference, I think, actually isn't so much in the mechanisms. It's this, Essex is revenue neutral. All of the money gets plowed back into direct rebates. You get it back in dollars and cents on your electric bill. Whereas WCI, as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, is actually the opposite. All of the money there is actually invested in various things that reduce carbon pollution more. And I actually think, honestly, probably something in the middle is the better way to go. And the reason is, there's a real benefit, and the first thing that EIV put forward was actually a revenue positive plan that spent quite a lot of money on other carbon reducing technologies. So there's a real value in amplifying the price effect of a carbon tax or cap and trade program by spending money on helping people weatherize their homes and get into EVs and all the rest. You accelerate the transition. However, if you are putting a substantial price, that's going to amount to hundreds or even thousands of dollars a year on individual Vermont families, and there's no direct rebate, if that family, especially for a lower income, household, isn't able to take advantage of one of those technologies in the near term, and they're not getting any money back in dollars and cents, then they're going to be in a financially tough place. And so having both money given back, just in cash to people to help them make ends meet while they're making the transition, and actually investing money in making the transition at the same time probably is the best from a straight substance standpoint. And then you get into the political realm, and that's where revenue neutral all of a sudden looks more appealing to many legislators.
Do we have other questions?
So-
Jill, let's be brief. We've got 10 minutes to get.
Mine's really quick.
Go.
One thing that I want to say is that I'm a member of an 80-member organization called TRACK, and we follow your legislative update. And when I started sending it to the group, I got so many positive comments about, wow, I really know what's going on now, so I urge everyone to follow that. Second question is, your form for comments, when we were talking to Becca Balint earlier, she was